Hi, this is Andrea LaFountain, your own personal psychologist and theologian. Welcome. I want to talk today about accountability with teenagers. I see today that there's not a lot of accountability. Parents seem to be shying away from it. Maybe they don't like doing it, or maybe they don't know how to do it. I would suggest that it's a very, very important part of parenting. In fact, if we don't hold our children accountable, I think we are creating serious issues for the child as an adult. And I believe it even compromises our future relationship with our child because they will look back when life's a mess for them and wonder why we allowed their lives to unravel. Accountability serves the purpose of teaching them when you do right, when you do good, when you do well, life goes well with you. And when you do wrong or you do bad or you hurt someone, life does not go well with you. We need to teach them that lesson. So I want to give you 3 tips or methods on how to do accountability well with your teenager. First of all, I'll mention one tip or strategy is just speak to the basic rules. So, for example, if your child, you told them tidy your room and they don't tidy the room, then you need to follow on with that. There needs to be some consequence there. Um, it could be that, okay, now not only are you going to tidy your own room, you're going to tidy your sister's room as well. Let them feel that there are rules there that need to be adhered to, and when they're not, it's just not gonna work. You can try to cast that into the future for them too. So, for example, you ask them to tidy their room, it's not tidy, and have the conversation. Well, what if you did that in the workplace? When you get a job, you're 17 now, you're going to be getting a job soon. If your boss asks you to have a report on his desk at Friday at 9 a.m. and you stroll into work at 11 a.m., it's just not going to work. You're going to get fired. And then you won't have income. Then you won't be able to pay your rent. Where does that end? It just unravels into chaos, um, and nobody wants that. So try to bring back the basic rule structure. It's not just what we have in our home, it's what society operates by. A lot of teenagers have this misconception that when they're 18 and leave home, they can do whatever they want. Have that conversation with them and say, no, you're foolish to think that way. If you don't want to do your assignments at college and you don't submit them, then you'll be dropped from college. If you don't do the deliverables that your boss is asking you at work, you'll get fired. If you don't want to get out of your bed when you have a job and you sleep in, you won't have a job. So the rules have to be followed in your home and even more broadly. So you're teaching them, be explicit, say, I am teaching you that following rules is important. You have to know that. You have to be able to live in that space of following rules, even when you don't want to. Tip number 2 is speak to their identity. So, if, for example, you find out that they've been bullying someone at school, the conversation can go, okay, so this is not who you are. What's going on here? You are fearfully and wonderfully made. This is not your character. Now, if they're feeling disconnected to their character, disconnected to their identity, which is probably likely if they're moving into more negative behaviors like bullying or drinking and getting drunk or staying out till 3 a.m. Again, I'm talking about teenagers here, not your little ones. Then there probably is some crisis of who they are as a person. So take the opportunity to speak into that. So if they're bullying and you want to rebalance that and say, this is not who you are, give them a concrete example. So, for example, you might say, do you remember when we had that little bird's nest in our yard and you were, looking after the eggs there, and they might draw a blank and not know what you're talking about, keep going with it. Say, yeah, it was when we lived in the house before this one. You were out in the yard playing with Michael and Johnny Smith. Do you remember those guys that you used to hang out with? Get them back into that scenario. If they can remember it, that's fantastic. And you can say, see, in that situation, you were so concerned for those little birds. Let them own that they are not the bully. Keep giving them the examples of that. Or maybe they found a stray dog and begged you to take it in, and maybe you didn't, but they found the dog and they begged you to take it in because they had that heart of compassion. So what you want to do is you want to recollect with them parts of their character that go against the bad behavior and really show the good behavior. For another example, if the issue is laziness, you might say to them, for laziness, well, you remember when you built that Lego tower and it had over 1,000 pieces? Wow, what an accomplishment that was. And you worked so hard at that. And you were so proud of yourself after you had built that. So you're pulling them out of this concept that they're role playing now of being lazy, and bringing them into a new mindset of, yeah, that's right. That's not me. I do remember doing that. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing that. So if you have a teenager who's playing out in any negative role, if it's disrespecting to you, laziness, aggression, find examples of where they were not that in their earlier years. Now, if you don't have a ready-made memory bank of those events, then I would encourage you just take some time out by yourself, maybe go to Starbucks, grab a coffee, notepad and paper, write the child's name at the top of the paper, write down the negative behavior, say laziness, write down the opposite of that, busy, industrious, and then just rack your brains recalling scenes from your child's childhood that speak into what it is you want them to be, the behaviors you want to see in them, and then use that as information and education to your child to help them understand, yeah, that isn't me. That's not me. That's not who I am. And my mom has all this proof to show that. So that's speaking into their identity. So the first one was just outline the basic rules, and that's a rule following in home and society. Number two, speak to their identity. And number three is speak to their purpose. So if it is, they stayed up, late at night, came rolling in at 3 a.m. and, the next morning their bedroom reeks of alcohol. The conversation, maybe not if they're hungover, but maybe the following day is, so what's going on there? What brought you to that? Why did you drink too much? Why did you not just have a beer or two with your friends? Why did it get out of hand? What was going on there? So there's a great opportunity to get inside the head of your teenager a little. What if they're sleeping around and having sex before, their due time? What's going on there? Do they not feel the value of their body, protecting their intimacy? This is a real opportunity to get deeper in the conversation. Now, if they are closing you down, maybe, it's just completely awkward to talk to you and talk to their parent about things like that, then you can say, okay, well, those are the questions that I want you to consider. I'm going to leave you alone, but I do want you to consider those questions. They're important for you to understand why you're doing this, because I really don't think this is the result you want in your life. Now, especially when your teenager is coming down to the end of the mark, 16, 17, they're about to leave home and be independent. You really want to navigate them to asking themselves those questions. It's great for you to be a sounding board with them. You have insight that they don't have in their younger years. You can even be vulnerable and say, I did something like that too when I was younger. Here's how it ended. It did not end well for me. You can learn from my mistakes. You don't have to make them yourself. Learn from my mistakes and be vulnerable. Share with them where you made those wrong decisions, and if you know why you did, share that insight behind it too, so they're not grappling in the dark. Now, this is about accountability. Now, there are three measures. You can see from this that there's no classic discipline here, no punishment with the rod. Here, accountability doesn't have to have that negative physical punishment tied to it. I've given you three methods there where there is no physical punishment, just clarifying the rules and your expectations. And then they have to do what it is you ask them to do anyway. They have to fulfill the rule and oversee that. And then speaking to their identity. And thirdly, speaking to their purpose. But the main reason why I haven't said if they do this, then this is the appropriate consequence is because often enough, the event itself provides the consequence. So, if, for example, they have been bullying, I can bet you they probably feel pretty crappy about themselves already. You probably don't need to issue additional punishment for them to feel the negative pinch of what they've done. Accountability, in a nutshell, is making sure the child feels the appropriate consequence for their behavior. I am a big proponent of natural consequence, intrinsic consequence. In other words, if they've been a bully and they feel sick to the stomach of themselves for having participated in that, if they are feeling real, genuine remorse and regret, then that's probably enough of a negative consequence for them to put two and two together and think, I don't want to do that again. Now, if they don't feel that natural consequence, psychologists would call it intrinsic consequence. If they're not feeling that in and of themselves, then as a parent, you need to bring that negative consequence to the table. So for youngsters or teenagers who have been brought up on a healthy diet of accountability since they were, crying for that pop in the supermarket and didn't get it, if they've had a healthy dose of accountability from the parent, by the time they're 15, 16, 17, they probably have built in intrinsic consequence. So they will naturally feel the consequence of their bad behavior. And then you can leave it at that as a parent. If they haven't, then you need to bring that in. So, if, for example, they've been the bully and they're not feeling remorse and they're not feeling regret, then you might introduce a harsher punishment from the parent to the child, whatever that might be. Different families have their own different sets of discipline. It could be, okay, you've lost your phone for 48 hours, or you're grounded, or whatever that is. But so the accountability is you are instituting the negative consequences for their negative behavior if they're not feeling the negative consequence naturally. Now, I mentioned remorse, regret. They are good feelings for your child to have for a while. You don't want them to linger too long in that, but nor do you want to take them out of those feelings prematurely. They need to linger long enough to contemplate and really appreciate what they've done. Another natural consequence, which I don't like to see in children, teens, or an adult, is shame. When your teenager naturally feels shamed for what they've done, this is a time where you can talk with them, sit with them, and say, okay, we both recognize what you did was wrong. And you regret that, and you need to make apology to the person for that, but you're not to feel ashamed of yourself for that. This was a bad moment. This is not who you are. We can write this. You are better than that. I know that. You know that. Let's leave the shame aside. You can sit in your regret for a while, but you're not to allow yourself to feel shamed. Have that conversation with them. And just related to shame, something that I am against is in the most vehement ways. Sometimes corporal punishment of a child involves shaming the child. A classic example is smacking the child when they have done wrong, I'm going back now to the early years, and it involves taking down their pants and their underwear and exposing their private parts to issue discipline. I am absolutely not in agreement with that in any shape or form. I am also against any form of discipline if it's done in anger. If it's too extreme, the punishment must fit the crime. Any punishment that is overdue the crime, just don't do any at all. You're better off not doing anything. And as I've given you today in this snippet, there's three methods of holding your child accountable. None of them involve physical discipline. None of them involve shaming the child. You will never get a tactic from me that involves shaming a child. We must always preserve the dignity of our children. And in fact, if there's only one tip that I give you as a parent, in all else that I can teach you, that if there's only one thing you want to have as a takeaway from me, it's you must preserve the dignity of your child. And that's the fundamental 101 of parenting. So there's three tips on how to hold your child accountable. If you can, just to summarize, allow the natural or intrinsic consequence to carry the child. And by the time you have late teenagers, they should be in that place of intrinsic consequence working in them. You're not going to be around to discipline them once they go off to college, and when they're married, their intrinsic value system needs to be working well for them. I'm a proponent of that. So basic rules, just summarize that, speak to their identity and speak to their purpose, and just help them navigate with dignity. This is Dr. Andrea LaFountain, your own personal theologian and psychologist.